Captain Vexter reviewed the ship manifest one more time. There was a late addition joining the convoy to Novaris. Novaris was a remote world that had been experiencing pirate problems with merchant traffic attacked multiple times over the last 2 years. As the pirates grew bolder, the situation had become unmanageable, and the Galactic Federation finally had to take action. Vexter was the captain of the light cruiser GSF Talaris and had been assigned to escort a merchant convoy from Heloria to Novaris as a deterrent against pirates. He didn't relish the task of babysitting a motley fleet of civilians, but as a gal-fed captain, he went where his orders directed. The final ship joining the convoy was the ISV Gazelle, a human merchanter that had been docked at Heloria even before Vexter arrived. They'd apparently had trouble securing new cargo to take aboard, and looking at the ship's specifications, Vexter couldn't blame anyone for hesitating to place their valuables on this aging rust bucket. But Novaris wasn't exactly a prime destination, and someone had evidently been desperate enough to contract the Gazelle to transport their cargo at the last minute. ISV Gazelle was an independent shipping vessel, owned and operated by her captain Marcus Reed. Even her designation was thoroughly human. Humans had some of the strictest licensing requirements for owning and operating Starship-class drives, which essentially put them beyond the reach of civilian individuals. In response, independent merchanters had banded together to found the Independent Shipping Vessel Company, which held the licenses for Starship drives operated by their members with minimal interference from the company itself. Vexter scoffed, but the humans were an upstart species. Perhaps it was best that not just anyone could acquire potentially volatile technology. That showed more responsibility than Vexter had heard based on their reputation. The Gazelle herself was nearly 60 years old, and examining her log showed she'd mostly operated within or near human space. This was as far as she had ever ventured from home. Still, despite the tarnish on her hull, she had passed her latest spaceworthiness inspection only 6 months prior. She was one of the strangest-looking ships Vexter had ever seen. Essentially, a lattice spine on which standard cargo containers were mounted like grapes on a vine. The front section contained habitation and docking, while the rear housed its large engine, ending in a flat plate mounted on what looked like pillars. Curious, Vexter studied her engine specifications. Her main engine was a type Vexter had never encountered before, something the humans called an Orion-type nuclear pulse thruster, and with her mass, impulse, and thrust, she would be by far the slowest vessel in the convoy, barely exceeding the acceptable lower limit. Her jump engine likewise was an antiquated Type I, just barely capable of performing the jumps required for this route. But she cleared the minimum requirements, so Vexter had to reluctantly accept her into the convoy. Slightly annoyed, Vexter sent the engine specifications to his astrogator to have their course and time estimates recalculated to match the Gazelle's slow speed. Then he dispatched a message to all 10 ships in his convoy to prepare to undock and rendezvous at the system's jump point in 12 hours. At the beginning of next morning's shift, Vexter entered the bridge to relieve the night shift watch officer. They had 2 hours until their scheduled jump departure, plenty of time to undock and travel the 50,000 kilometers to the jump point. Captain Vexter turned to the operations officer from the previous watch. "Anything noteworthy happening?" Lieutenant Commander Jorex shrugged. "Just the humans, sir. The Gazelle cast off 6 hours ago and has been slowly making her way to the jump point using maneuvering thrusters only." Vexter was taken aback. "What? Why?" Jorex shrugged again. "No idea, sir, but they'll be arriving at the jump point just before the scheduled time." Captain Vexter just shook his head. "All right, thanks, I have the bridge." Jorex nodded and announced, "Captain has the bridge." Jorex turned and left as Vexter settled into the command chair. Captain Vexter waited for the other stations to complete their watch handover and then turned to communications. "Lieutenant Mareth requests undocking." "Aye, sir," the comm officer responded. Vexter then turned to the astrogation officer. "Lieutenant Draven, please prepare a course plan to take us to the jump point after we've moved past the station's safety perimeter and execute once we have undocking permission." Next, Vexter glanced over at his executive officer sitting at the operations station. While we're en route, prepare a convoy placement assignment for each ship according to the exclusion zones of their engines. I want us in the middle. Hopefully the pirates will think we're just another fat merchantman until it's too late. Commander Zelnar nodded. Aye, sir. I believe I can nestle us between GMS Corinth and IXS Varian. I'll have to determine what to do with the human ship. Very good. Lieutenant Mareth turned around. Sir, undocking clearance granted. We have a 1-minute window. Captain Vexter nodded. Lieutenant Draven, undock and execute. Aye, sir. There was an almost imperceptible shift as the GSF Talaris detached from the station and pushed away using its maneuvering thrusters. After 30 seconds, they had cleared the station perimeter and engaged their fusion drive. Even at the minimal power permitted near stations, it would only take about 30 minutes to reach their designated staging point. Captain, Commander Zelnar interrupted after a few minutes. Have you examined the exclusion chart for the human ship? Vexter furrowed his brow. No, why? Commander Zelnar hesitated momentarily. I think you should. Captain Vexter called up the schematic of the human ship on his terminal. It remained one of the ugliest vessels he had ever seen, but he wasn't judging a beauty contest. He switched the overlay layers to the engine exclusion zone. What the hell? He exclaimed. For most ships, the exclusion zone was a cone behind them a few degrees wide. For ISV Gazelle, it was an entire half-sphere and more, covering almost 200 degrees of arc and extending all the way to 5,000 kilometers, with an advisory zone reaching 20,000 kilometers. I believe I understand why they're inching out there with just their maneuvering thrusters, Commander Zelnar suggested. There's no way they could have activated that drive anywhere near the station. After a moment, he continued, I think the only viable position for them is at the very back of the convoy with nobody behind them. Captain Vexter shook his head in disbelief. Do they have a completely unshielded reactor back there? I don't know. I've never encountered anything like this, but it must be by design and approved since they've passed their inspections. Vexter sighed. Well, transmit the assigned relative positions to all ships and maneuver us into position to wait for them. The convoy of all 10 merchant ships had taken their positions around the cruiser GSF Talaris, with the IXS Solus at the front and ISV Gazelle at the rear. All ships slaved their jump engines to the control of GSF Talaris, and together they tore a hole in reality that transported them to another star system, a dozen light-years away. The system they appeared in was uninhabited, a small red dwarf with only a catalog number for a name. They would need to traverse the system to the next jump point that would allow them to jump to the next star in the chain to Novaris. Most of the time traveling across the galaxy was spent moving between jump points within each star system. Some systems were fortunate with jump points close together, while others had them far apart, requiring significant time and delta V to traverse. The locations of jump points and possible destinations depended on the background arrangement of dark matter permeating the galaxy, which warped the extra dimensions of spacetime. The convoy faced almost a week of travel to reach the next jump point in this system, and just over 2 months to reach Novaris. Captain Vexter surveyed the monitors and concluded that everything was in order. Lieutenant Draven, plot a course to the next jump point. The astrogator glanced over. Already laid in, Captain, ready to execute on your command. Very good, Lieutenant, Vexter acknowledged with satisfaction. Signal the convoy to get underway and execute. 10 of the ships in the convoy each activated their fusion torches of various designs, and the convoy began moving, but behind the 11th ship, the ISV Gazelle, something exploded with nuclear fury. Captain, Sensor Officer Krivos shouted. The engine of the Gazelle just exploded. What? The captain looked up. Just his luck that the human rust bucket would suffer a catastrophic engine failure immediately upon firing up that dangerous engine of theirs. Signal all stop. As quickly as the fleet had started moving, the torches dimmed as each ship ceased accelerating. Vexter hit the transmit button on his terminal. This is Captain Vexter of GSF Talaris to ISV Gazelle. Do you require assistance? Vexter examined the sensor scan on his screen while waiting for their reply. At least there didn't seem to be much debris. Hopefully the humans hadn't suffered many casualties. A calm, if slightly confused, voice came over the speakers. "This is ISV Gazelle, a negative on assistance. Why, what's the problem?" Captain Vexter looked at his sensor officer, who just spread his arms, then back to the sensor display before hitting transmit again. "Talaris to Gazelle, did you not just experience a catastrophic engine failure?" Oh. There was sudden recognition in the voice on the radio. "Negative Talaris. That was the detonation of our 50-kiloton nuclear propulsion charge." 50-kiloton propulsion. Your ship EJECTS nuclear BOMBS. Captain Vexter immediately regretted his lapse in professionalism, but the sheer insanity of the concept had caught him completely off guard. "Affirmative Talaris. Apologies for the confusion." The shaped nuclear charges are used to push against the drive plate at the rear of the ship, which transfers the momentum through a staged shock absorber assembly. After the convoy had overcome the shock of the human's propulsion system, the rest of the voyage to the jump point proceeded quietly, or as quietly as a fleet trailing a stream of nuclear explosions can go. The second and third jumps passed similarly. When the convoy appeared in the fourth system on the route, another unremarkable nameless star, things rapidly deteriorated. Before the convoy could begin moving, a warhead detonated 500,000 kilometers from the jump point. 3 pirate cruisers activated their M-suites and aimed their targeting radars at the merchant convoy. The pirates were well positioned to intercept any merchants attempting to flee, with each pirate able to cover a large section of the possible escape trajectories. An ultimatum was transmitted on all universal emergency channels. "This is Captain Drevkal of the Void Reapers. Stand down your ships and prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will be met with lethal force." Captain Vexter considered his options. The Federation Fleet Command hadn't anticipated this level of pirate presence. Previous raids had been conducted by single ships. His light cruiser might be able to engage 2 of the pirates, depending on their equipment and training, but all 3 would be overwhelming, especially with them spread out, preventing him from concentrating his point defenses in any single direction. However, he hadn't yet revealed that GSF Talaris was a warship. His vessel had been selected because it was approximately the right size to pass as a medium merchantman. Could he leverage this advantage somehow? "Lieutenant Marath, signal the convoy to stand by. Com laser only, let's not reveal our hand yet." Captain Vexter prayed none of the merchanters would panic and run. He commanded only 1 ship. He couldn't protect everyone if they scattered. "Lieutenant Commander Krivos, use passive scanners only. Limit actives to equipment a merchantman might realistically possess. Activate full sensors only if our cover is blown." Vexter was stalling for time, and he knew it. He needed something to give him an edge. Anything, just one way to neutralize one of the pirate cruisers to even the odds. On the screen, vectors appeared showing the pirate ships carefully accelerating toward the convoy since it seemed to be surrendering. Whatever plan he devised would need to be implemented quickly. Then the comm officer spoke up. "Captain, we have a laser message from ISV Gazelle. Captain Reed wants to speak with you." Vexter sighed. Great, he didn't have time to deal with a panicking merchanter now. "Tell them to stand by." A few moments later, Lieutenant Marath replied, "He's being quite persistent, sir." "Fine," Vexter grumbled. "Put him on my monitor." Captain Vexter waited until his screen displayed the image of a middle-aged human wearing a black collared suit with a white shirt underneath and a tie around his neck. On his head was a white hat with a black visor, bearing a golden patch with a stylized gazelle surrounded by golden ropes. "Captain Reed, what do you want?" Vexter tried to conceal his annoyance, but it leaked into his tone. "We're rather occupied at the moment." Captain Reed ignored his tone. "Captain Vexter, I apologize for the interruption, but I have a suggestion. Am I correct in assuming that 3 pirate ships are too many for you to handle?" Vexter hesitated. Reed sighed. "Captain, this is no time for ego, is it so?" He fixed Vexter with a stern gaze. "Because if it is, then the Gazelle can engage one of them." Vexter's eyes widened. "What? No, out of the question." "Captain, the Gazelle's drive plate is designed to withstand repeated nuclear explosions with minimal ablation. It's tougher than battleship hull, And I suspect the pirates don't know that our ship ejects nuclear bombs either, as you so eloquently put it. Reed glared at Vexter. I'm not planning to die today after a failed last stand, so one more time, do you need help or not? Vexter glanced aside. As much as he hated to admit it, he did need assistance. After an agonizingly long moment, he turned back to face the other captain. Yes, you're right. We can probably handle two, but not all three. Reed nodded. All right, here's what I propose. The control room of the merchantman was Spartan compared to a warship's bridge. Captain Marcus Reed stood beside the sensor comm station watching the radar plot. His heart raced as he hoped he wasn't about to do something catastrophically stupid. Glancing around, he knew his crew felt the same anxiety, but they had to try. He took a deep breath and exhaled. All right, Alyssa, jettison the cargo containers. Hiroshi, use the azopod thrusters and let's make like a bat out of hell. The engineer, Alyssa Chen, pressed buttons on her console and a series of thumps echoed throughout the ship. All containers released. Helm Officer Hiroshi Tanaka used the translation joystick to pull the ship backward from between the containers now drifting in space. We're clear. Then he turned the ship to a new heading and fired the azopod maneuvering thrusters at maximum. Batting out of hell. The azopod thrusters could rotate to allow the ship to accelerate in almost any direction. They were designed for use near ports for both maneuvering and mobility, where the Gazelle couldn't use her main nuclear pulse engine. Because of this, the azopods were unusually powerful for a vessel of her size, and with the Gazelle rid of all cargo, they provided impressive acceleration. Sanjay Kumar glanced up at the captain standing beside him. Radio from Talaris. He pressed a button to broadcast it through the loudspeakers. Captain Vexter's voice sounded frantic as he yelled at the Gazelle. Get back here, Gazelle. Didn't you hear what they said? Marcus composed himself to play his part. Then he pressed a button on Sanjay's station and shouted back in panic. Forget that. I'm getting the hell out of here. Every man for himself. He took a moment to steady himself again. All right, Sanjay, let's see which pirate takes the bait. Hiroshi, once we know who's pursuing us, turn so our drive plate faces them. Make a convincing show of trying to escape. We need to lure them far enough away. Will do, Marcus, Hiroshi acknowledged. I'll give them a merry chase. Now we just hope they want us disabled rather than using missiles, Marcus voiced everyone's concern. Alyssa, how are your modifications progressing? Without looking up from her console, Alyssa replied, I've got the launcher patched. I've voided practically every warranty we have, but I managed to persuade it to load 4 charges simultaneously. With our largest bombs, that'll give them a 2-megaton surprise. Marcus nodded. Very good, Alyssa continued. The bombs proved more difficult. I should be able to override their attitude control software, but they also have hardware safeties. I sent Jonesy to physically bypass them. But that also means he can attach a radio module while he's working, so we'll be able to detonate them on command. Marcus grinned. Excellent work. Let me know when Jonesy completes the modifications. Just one final issue. Once we load any bombs into the launcher, we won't be able to unload them again. Understood. Keep the launcher on full manual then and load only on my command for now. Sanjay interjected. Contact 3 is changing course to intercept. I've marked it pink on the radar display. Marcus glanced toward the helm. Hiroshi, on it. At our new heading, they'll reach weapons range in 52 minutes. By then, we'll have used 84% of our maneuvering propellant. Alyssa winced. Marcus noticed her reaction. What's wrong, Alyssa? Just thinking about our next overhaul. The azopods weren't designed for this kind of sustained operation. Good to see you're still an optimist, Hiroshi remarked. As Alyssa glared at him, he added, You think we'll live long enough to service them? Alyssa laughed and the rest of the command crew joined in. Their moment of levity was cut short when Sanjay announced a message from Contact 3. Gazelle, this is Captain Thorax of Raider Drenched in Sorrow. Stand down immediately or you will be fired upon. This is your only warning. After a moment of silence, Captain Reed said, Let them eat static. It had been a tense half-hour as the Gazelle led the pirate raider away from the rest of the group. Once they were too distant for Drenched in Sorrow to turn back and help his pirate allies, the GSF Talaris broke from the convoy and raced to engage the other 2 pirates. With all pieces in motion, it was now Captain Thorax's turn to decide. He had 3 options. Continue pursuing the gazelle, turn back to aid against GSF Talaris, or withdraw and flee. If he turned to attack GSF Talaris, he would arrive too late to assist Dark Vengeance and Terror Ascending. If the two ships failed to defeat Talaris, he would face Talaris alone with unpredictable results depending on how much damage his allies had inflicted. If Dark Vengeance and Terror Ascending managed to destroy Talaris, then he would have let the gazelle escape pointlessly. If he chose to flee, his chances depended on whether Dark Vengeance and Terror Ascending could destroy or disable Talaris. Talaris was faster so could overtake Drenched in Sorrow before he could escape the system at the next jump point. But if his allies did destroy Talaris, his attempt to flee would not be viewed favorably by the Reaper's leader. So regardless of the outcome, his only viable option was to pursue the gazelle. If Dark Vengeance and Terror Ascending prevailed against GSF Talaris, then capturing the gazelle was the most valuable action. If they lost to GSF Talaris, his position would be no better or worse than if he'd abandoned the gazelle. He would still have to face Talaris regardless. He sent a message to Captain Drevko aboard the Dark Vengeance outlining his plan to continue chasing the gazelle to prevent its escape, along with his rationale. What he didn't mention was that if Dark Vengeance and Terror Ascending lost to Talaris but damaged her enough for him to destroy her, well, then he would become the new leader of the Void Reapers. Tension filled the control room of the ISV Gazelle as minutes passed while the raider Drenched in Sorrow pursued them. Several 100,000 kilometers away, GSF Talaris and Raiders Dark Vengeance and Terror Ascending were rapidly closing on each other. Nuclear explosion, Sanjay announced suddenly. The Raiders have opened fire on GSF Talaris. I think Talaris's point defense intercepted that warhead. It detonated too far to cause damage. Marcus nodded silently. They could do nothing more to assist. That battle was now in Captain Vexter's hands. 2 more detonations, this time targeting Contact 2. Their point defenses stopped them. Vexter and Talaris had one advantage. They could exhaust their magazines without consequence. For the pirates, every missile fired was irreplaceable, as they couldn't simply dock at a naval yard to restock. But with 2 pirate ships, if their magazines were full, Talaris would face serious trouble. No fire for a few moments. I believe they're testing each other at extreme missile range. Marcus turned to Sanjay. How long until Drenched in Sorrow reaches missile range, assuming similar capabilities? Sanjay checked the range plot. 2 minutes. Suddenly, a radiation alarm sounded. Marcus gave Sanjay a questioning look. Sanjay examined his instruments. That was 10,000 kilometers away and off to our flank, likely a warning shot, negligible radiation exposure. Marcus considered his options briefly. We'll maintain course. Hopefully they won't waste more missiles on us. The uneasy silence returned, occasionally broken as Sanjay reported developments in the distant battle. The exchange of fire intensified as the combatants closed distance. GSF Talaris was pressing toward Terror Ascending as rapidly as possible. Her point defenses worked near saturation as the 2 pirates launched missile after missile. Similarly, her missiles pushed the crew aboard Terror Ascending to their limits. Hit, Sanjay exclaimed. Contact 2 has left debris behind. Everyone cheered. A hit was encouraging, but far from decisive. Warships were heavily compartmentalized, and even a direct warhead impact only inflicted localized damage. Soon missile detonations were joined by invisible anti-ship laser beams as GSF Talaris and Terror Ascending reached energy weapon range. Both vessels sustained hull damage. Warship armor incorporated diamond threads, approaching thermal superconductivity. When a laser struck a panel, the weave distributed the thermal load to prevent localized vaporization, allowing the plate to radiate heat before another hit. But if any plate became thermally saturated, the entire section would melt simultaneously. Sanjay could detect thermal spikes on his IR scanners, but his instruments lacked the resolution to determine the damage inflicted. The merchant vessels relaying their scanner data to the Gazelle had similar limitations, though this relay allowed Sanjay to monitor Drenched in Sorrow despite it being in their drive plate's shadow. No sensor mounted on the plate could survive the repeated nuclear bombardment it endured during normal operation. They could only speculate about the battle's progress. Both ships were venting atmosphere and debris. Both had sustained damage, but the severity remained unknown. Then their own situation deteriorated. Alyssa frowned. I believe Drenched in Sorrow just fired their lasers at us. I'm detecting increased thermal load on the drive plate. Activating cooling system. Marcus swallowed hard. This was their moment of truth. Here we go then. Hiroshi, start evasive maneuvers with the azipods but keep the drive plate between us and them. Make it look convincing without presenting an easy target. I think we just experienced a near miss. The drive plate heat load spiked again but less severely. I believe only the fringe of the beam caught us. Marcus nodded. Continue evasion. With their powerful azipods capable of lateral movement in almost any direction, the cargo-free Gazelle presented a much more difficult target than a conventional warship. But every evasive maneuver consumed precious maneuvering propellant. They couldn't maintain this pace indefinitely. Direct hit on our plate, Alyssa reported. Vent all airlocks. Let's make them think they've damaged us. The Gazelle shuddered slightly as the airlocks expelled clouds of air around the ship. Too bad we didn't think to load debris in them beforehand, Sanjay remarked. Marcus grinned. This will have to suffice. Alyssa, load a 10-kiloton starter charge into the launcher. Next time they score a direct hit, fire it. Hiroshi, when it detonates, put us into a spin. Hopefully they'll think they've disabled our engines. Understood, Hiroshi acknowledged. Alyssa entered commands on her console. Charge loaded. Hiroshi, when I say stop, cease all thrust. I don't want us drifting from the drive plate's shadow before detonation. Hiroshi nodded. Drenched in Sorrow scored several near misses. Then the plate's temperature spiked again, another direct hit. Stop! Alyssa shouted, then activated the drive manually. Moments later, a brilliant flash appeared to the Drenched in Sorrow as the Gazelle felt the surge of acceleration from the nuclear explosion's momentum transfer through the shock absorbers. Hiroshi immediately used the azipods to send their ship into an end-over-end tumble. This was the moment when Marcus risked everything. If the pirate cruiser fired its laser just once more, they could be penetrated straight through. Merchant vessels lacked the comprehensive armor plating that protected warships. The bridge fell deathly silent as everyone held their breath. Seconds passed, then more seconds. The recharge interval for the pirate's spinal laser elapsed without incident. Everyone exhaled in relief as seconds turned to minutes. The pirates wanted their prize intact, believing they had disabled it. Even as their immediate danger subsided, the distant battle between Talaris and the pirates continued to rage. Captain Vexter had managed to cripple terror ascending in the laser exchange. The pirate cruiser was devastated, hulled through in multiple locations with a massive breach where her main power plant had been. But Talaris had suffered heavily too. One side had been scoured of point defenses, multiple missile launchers were disabled or destroyed, and several compartments were exposed to vacuum. She vented atmosphere as she turned toward the remaining pirate, both vessels still exchanging missile fire. The Gazelle's crew had little time to spectate. With them apparently disabled and adrift, Drenched in Sorrow closed the remaining distance much faster, preparing to position alongside. Captain Reed stood at the sensor station watching the tactical display with Officer Kumar. They exchanged nervous glances as the distance decreased. Executing the final phase of their plan correctly was critical. They would get only one opportunity. Once they lost the element of surprise, they would be defenseless against the pirates' missiles. Alyssa, load the launcher with 4 of our largest charges. Hiroshi, when Drenched in Sorrow comes within 10 kilometers, stabilize us and aim the drive plate at them. Alyssa, once we're stable, go to rapid fire with as many 500 kiloton charges as possible. Marcus took a deep breath to steady himself. Detonate the charges when you judge optimal, or if they detect our ruse. Let's hope this works. Alyssa nodded and worked frantically at her console to implement the instructions. She needed to program the bombs to orient toward Drenched in Sorrow rather than their drive plate. She'd replaced the normal stabilization software with her own custom version and uploaded it to the bombs, but still needed to calculate positioning based on her best estimate of where Drenched in Sorrow would be when the bombs detonated. The bombs lacked external sensors, relying solely on gyroscopes for orientation. 20 kilometers, Sanjay announced. Time seemed to crawl as everyone operated on adrenaline. 15 kilometers. Hiroshi gripped the control stick, ready to execute. He had already oriented the azipods to cancel their rotation, but would then need to face the pirate cruiser. 12 kilometers, 11 kilometers, 10 kilometers. Hiroshi waited a moment longer before pulling the stick to ensure they would stop as close to the target orientation as possible. The ship shuddered as the azipods worked to halt the spin. With rotation neutralized, Hiroshi rolled the ship so the azipods wouldn't need to reorient before pointing toward the pirate. He wanted to save every possible second. On target, Hiroshi announced. Alyssa activated her program, launching. The entire operation took mere seconds, catching the pirates completely unprepared. The pirate vessel took no action as 4 small elongated spheres flew toward it from the small aperture in the center of the Gazelle's massive drive plate. Seconds later, another group of spheres launched, then another. The pirate ship finally halted its approach with maneuvering thrusters and began turning its spinal laser toward the not as disabled as they thought merchantmen to finish them off. Alyssa waited until the last possible moment before the first group of bombs would drift past the pirate and out of their shaped charge effectiveness. Then she pressed the detonation button. Firing. A dozen 500-kiloton nukes exploded simultaneously at point-blank range to the pirate cruiser. 6 megatons of nuclear fury. But these weren't ordinary nukes. They were shaped charges with most of the blast directed forward through a heavy tungsten layer, converted to plasma and propelled toward the unfortunate pirate whose hull lacked the reinforcement of the Gazelle's drive plate. At this range, the barrage could have penetrated a battleship. Seconds later, another 2-megaton barrage detonated. Then another. Drenched in Sorrow completed its turn to bring its spinal laser to bear on the merchantman, but continued rotating beyond its target, the weapon remaining dark. A cloud of atmosphere and debris surrounded the stricken pirate vessel. When the 4th barrage of bombs struck its main power plant, Drenched in Sorrow split in 2 as the reactor amidships exploded. Debris impacted all around the Gazelle as the explosion pushed against its drive plate, harmlessly driving the ship away from the destroyed hulk of the pirate cruiser. Holy fucking shit, Sanjay whispered as he stared at his sensor screen. Captain Marcus Reed walked to his chair and collapsed into it as the adrenaline drained from his system. Everyone on the bridge deflated like balloons losing their air. Reload the drive with propulsion charges. Get us the hell out of here, Marcus ordered between heavy breaths. Alyssa fired the last modified charges to clear the launcher. Her hand trembled above the detonation button. She couldn't bring herself to press it. The pirate ship was already more than destroyed. She let the nukes drift harmlessly past the wreckage as she reset the launcher's loading priority and restored standard automatic operation. Within seconds, the first 10 kT charge aimed at their drive plate detonated, pushing them away. Alyssa allowed the computer to resume control, and soon the Gazelle accelerated rapidly, racing from the broken hull of the pirate ship like her namesake. Without cargo, even the smallest charges propelled her like an Olympic sprinter. Direction was irrelevant, all that mattered was distance. They'd momentarily forgotten about the battle elsewhere. 10 minutes later, the numb silence in the control room was broken by a radio call. GSF Talaris to ISV Gazelle. Captain Reed, what is your status? As ISV Gazelle rejoined the convoy, GSF Talaris maneuvered alongside her, or what remained of GSF Talaris. The battle with the pirates had exacted a terrible toll on the light cruiser. Hardly a square meter of hull remained unscarred. A long gash ran along one side, with even a hole penetrating completely through. The opposite side had been stripped of hull-mounted weapons and sensors, with multiple compartments exposed to space. Over a third of her crew had perished. It seemed miraculous that she remained operational. The pirate fleet had paid an even steeper price. All 3 cruisers drifted as lifeless, shattered wrecks. Drenched in Sorrow lay broken in 2. Terror Ascending was missing a quarter of its structure where the power plant had once been, and Dark Vengeance floated in fragments after multiple missile impacts when Talaris finally overwhelmed its defenses. Few pirates survived, and fewer still had wanted to. Only 15 escape pods launched from the ruined vessels, out of a total crew complement of 120. The remainder had died in battle or chosen to perish with their ships. The survivors would be collected and face justice for their crimes. Captain Vexter observed the human vessel on his screen and saluted. The Gazelle might be old and tarnished, might appear strange and ungainly, but Captain Vexter now felt proud to have her and her crew in his fleet. She was no longer merely part of the convoy. She had become one of its defenders. And thanks to her contribution, they had triumphed against overwhelming odds.